अल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन वस्सलातु वस्सलामु अला रसूलिहिल करीम रब्बि इश्रह ली सदरी व यस्सिर ली अमरी वहलुल उक़दतम मिन लिसानी यफ़क़हू क़ौली। अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू। I will share stories of successful people. अपनी नोटबुक और पेन को रेडी रखिए ताकि आप ये लिख सकें फॉर्मूला की टू सक्सेस। उन्होंने सक्सेस हासिल की है तो उसकी रीज़न क्या है, और मैं जब इनकी स्टोरीज़ पूरी कर चुका हूँ तो फिर मैं आपसे पूछूंगा कि मुझे बताएं कि उनकी सक्सेस का राज क्या है। We shall inshallah definitely see the detail. The first person that is on the board is Henry Ford. Ford का नाम सुना हो आपने? While Ford is today known for his innovative assembly line and American-made cars, he wasn't an instant success. Ford एक गाड़ियों मोटर मैकेनिक था किसी ज़माने में। इसने गाड़ी बनाई फोर्ड के नाम से, अमेरिकन कार है, और इसकी सक्सेस के पीछे क्या नाम, क्या राज है? वो कहते हैं लिखने वाले, ही वाज़न्ट एन इंस्टेंट सक्सेस, इसको एकदम कामयाबी नहीं मिली। कैसे मिली? इन फैक्ट हिज अर्ली बिजनेस फेल्ड, उसका जो शुरू वाला बिजनेस था उसमें वो नाकाम हो गया। एंड लेफ्ट हिम ब्रोक 5 times, 5 दफा नाकाम हुआ। He founded the successful Ford Motor Company. फिर कहीं जाके उसकी कंपनी को शोहरत मिली। हेनरी फोर्ड नाम सुना आपने, टोयोटा या होंडा का नाम सुना होगा, लेकिन फोर्ड कंपनी इज वेरी एक्सपेंसिव कंपनी इन द वर्ल्ड, एंड द रीजन बिहाइंड हिज सक्सेस इज, आई विल आस्क यू लेटर.
Henry Ford once came, got his team, and said, I'm intelligent enough to understand there's got to be something called a V8, but I'm ignorant, I don't know how to build it. I'm not educated. You people have to build it. Guess what all the educated people said? Mr. Ford, we know what can be done, we also know what cannot be done. A V8 is an impossibility, can never be built. He said, go build it. A month later, there was the same answer. We're educated people, you are our employer, we can't argue with you. V8 is an impossibility. He said, go back and do it again. This happened 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, whatever, a year. And then eventually, Henry Ford said, don't come out till you got my V8. And finally, they got his V8.
Number 2, the successful person in the world is Soyoshiro Honda. Timaru Dawata. पता नहीं क्या बोलते हैं. The $1 billion business that is Honda began with a series of failures. ये बंदे का नाम जिसको हम होंडा कहते हैं, this Honda. उसने अपना बिजनेस शुरू किया नाकामियों के साथ. Fortune turns of luck. कामयाबी मिली. Honda was turned down by Toyota Motor Corporation for a job after interviewing for a job as an engineer. उसको जॉब में से निकाल दिया गया था टोयोटा में से. leaving him jobless for quite some time. कुछ देर के लिए उसको नौकरी नहीं मिली. He started making scooters of his own at home. घर में बैठकर स्कूटर बनाता रहा भैया. हाँ जी, हमने बड़ी छलांग मारते हैं, हम कुल्फी बना लेते हैं बैठ में, फलूदा बना लेते हैं. एनीवे, इसका भी अच्छा बिजनेस हो अगर आप इसको हाई लेवल पे लेके जाएं. लेकिन हम लिमिटेड अप्रोच होती है ना कि बस 150 बिक जाएंगे, बस ठीक है बंडे. हालांकि इसका बिजनेस भी आप वर्ल्ड वाइड ले सकते हैं. एक चिकन को पूरी दुनिया में घुमाया जा सकता है, तो कुल्फी को क्यों नहीं भाई जान? उसके पीछे हम उन फॉर्मूलास को फॉलो नहीं करते हैं. Inspired by his neighbors, finally start his own business. आजकल हंडा देख रहे हैं आप मार्केट में कैसा है, और इसके पीछे फेलियर. ही वॉज अ फेलियर, नाकाम था, लेकिन आज आपके सामने सक्सेस.
The year is 1930, and this is one man's journey. He was an aspiring engineer, but what he wanted more than anything in the world was to create engines. So he had a dream. His dream was to create his own efficient engine prototype. He called it the piston ring engine, and so he invested all his time and money into making this dream a reality. He figured he'd create an engine prototype that was revolutionary, and he hoped that this would allow him to get a job at one of the biggest car manufacturers in the area, Toyota. Now, of course, his dream cost a lot of money, and so much so that it actually made him broke. He even had to pawn his wife's engagement ring to fund the project, with the promise that one day it would all be worth it. And eventually, his project was complete. He took his ideas straight to the factory and requested an interview. He told them that he was a passionate engineer and that he just wanted to work in the assembly line. He showed them his idea and they turned it down. They told him that his idea was flawed and that he had no qualifications and that he didn't know what he was doing, so they weren't interested. They just didn't want to work with him. So he got sent home with his tail between his legs and having to swallow the bitter pill of rejection. But he still wanted to be an engineer. He still loved making engines. So he spent his next days and months making small engines for bicycles, and he would ride his creations around the town. One day his neighbor noticed him and asked if he could take one of his creations around for a spin. So he does, and he comes back and says, "Wow, this is actually pretty good. Why don't you go into your own business? Why don't you make scooters?" He thought about the idea for a moment and he said, "You know what? I love doing this. I think I will. I'm gonna do scooters." That's what he started with. But that's not what he ended with. His last name was Honda.
Number 3, Akio Morita. वो कौन था? You may not have heard of Morita. आपने इसके बारे में नहीं सुना होगा, but you've undoubtedly heard of his company, Sony. ये उसकी कंपनी का नाम है. Sony इलेक्ट्रॉनिक कंपनी है. आजकल देख लीजिए इसकी शोहरत मार्केट में. क्या हुआ? Sony's first product was a rice cooker. इसने सबसे पहली जो चीज बनाई वो चावल बनाने वाला एक कुकर था. Unfortunately, didn't cook rice so much, just burn it. उसने उतने पकाया नहीं जितने जला दिए. सोनी ने क्या किया? राइस कुकर बनाया, और जब बना तो ज्यादा चावल जले, पके नहीं. Selling less than 100 units. This first setback didn't stop Morita. ये वाला जो उसको दचका लगा था उसने उसको रोका नहीं. His partner, as they pushed forward to create a multi-billion-dollar company. अब ये देखिए, multi-million-dollar company, Sony is before you. इसके पीछे राज क्या है ये आपने जानना है. जान लिया होगा, लिख लीजिए, बाद में पूछूंगा मैं आपसे.
Mr. Morita is highly critical of the way Americans do business. Among his charges, that if we've lost our competitive edge, we have only ourselves to blame. We'll see what we can learn from him tonight.
Akio Morita presides over a company with sales last year exceeding the gross national product of Zimbabwe, Iceland, and Honduras combined, $16 billion in all. Not bad for a firstborn son expected to take over the family sake brewery. Electronic physics is what Morita loved and what he pursued after the war. He began Sony with a $500 stake from his family, working out of the basement of a bombed-out Tokyo department store. The rise began in 1952 when Sony bought the rights from Western Electric to manufacture the transistor in Japan. Morita knew early on he wanted to sell internationally. He was one of the first Japanese industrialists to hire a Madison Avenue firm to introduce the name Sony to America.
A Sony of my own.
Morita's genius is creating products we don't even know we want. But once on the shelves, we can't get enough of them. There's the Trinitron television set, the Walkman, the Video Watchman, the compact disc, and more. Sony is bigger here than in Japan, and so is Morita. He's important enough to have been asked to sell an American product.
The American Express card don't leave home without it.
In his homeland, Morita is not a member of the old-line business elite, the Zaibatsu, and his style sets him apart as well. Some suggest a book Morita recently co-authored with a popular nationalist politician critical of the United States was his attempt to become a part of the Zaibatsu. Morita naively believed the book would stay inside Japan. When it became an underground must-read in the United States, his plan backfired. But for the most part, Morita, still energetic at 69, has strung together one success after another. And the question must be asked, what in him made it all work? He argued that the vaunted Sony spirit of seeking the unknown describes not only the company, but also the man who created it. This is Jackie Judd for Nightline.
Number 4, Bill Gates. इसकी history देखिए. Gates didn't seem like a shoo-in for success after dropping out of Harvard and starting a failed-first business with Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen Cole Trafodata. स्कूल से निकाल दिया गया. फिर अपने यार बेली के साथ मिलके इसने काम शुरू किया माइक्रोसॉफ्ट. और आजकल देख लीजिए उसकी सक्सेस. एक वक्त ऐसा भी आया था दुनिया का अमीर तरीन आदमी ये था. While this early idea didn't work, Gates' later work did, creating the global empire that is Microsoft. माइक्रोसॉफ्ट का मालिक. स्कूल से निकाल दिया क्या और एक आइकॉन बना हुआ आपके सामने. उसने एक अज़्म किया कि मैं ये चाहता हूँ कि दुनिया में जितने भी इंसान हैं उनके डेस्क पे कंप्यूटर होना चाहिए. वो इस सोच को लेके चला और आज आप देख सकते हैं कि आपके घर में सोने के लिए तकिए नहीं होंगे, कंप्यूटर लाजमी होगा. And his idea worked and he is successful in his idea. अब अपने गिरेबान में झांकिए कि हमने कभी अपने नाम को इनकी लिस्ट में देखना कभी ख्वाहिश की नहीं.
So one thing about Bill as a young boy is very early he demonstrated this really insatiable curiosity about things. He became a voracious reader.
He would bring a book to a Husky game. I mean, how can you not sit there and be fully engaged in a Husky football game? I just didn't understand that.
We knew he was smart and he was academically gifted, but we didn't have any impression that there was something world-class going on in our living room necessarily.
My 8th grade year, they got a terminal that was connected over a phone line to a GE time-sharing computer. And Paul Allen, who was 2 years ahead of me, was one of the people who was most curious about it.
Before you knew it, there was just a core group of about a dozen of us that would spend every spare moment between classes, or if we had a spare period, in this room just learning like little sponges everything we could about programming.
He snuck out of the house to go use computer time that wasn't necessarily his to use, and I was fully aware of all of his escapades in and out of the house, but never reported on any of those.
They'd always have some secret window they left unlocked, and they'd get back in this room, and start knocking around with this thing for who knows how long.
Back in college, Bill was really very intense about the things that he was interested in. That included some of his classes, especially the math classes, independent studies, and computer science. And he was very intense about games. He was very intense about pinball. He was very intense about playing Pong and Breakout. And most of all, he was very intense about playing poker.
It's a cold Boston winter, and we're at Harvard Square, where there's this magazine store.
I saw the Altair in Cambridge, in Harvard Square in Cambridge, and showed Bill the magazine, and I said, we should do BASIC for this.
Paul says, look, this is happening without us. We're going to miss it. Somebody else is going to do the cool software. And so we hunker down and write a BASIC interpreter for this 8080 chip. Then we were calling up this company with the kit computer and saying, we have a BASIC. And they say, oh, yeah, sure. And so Paul flew to Albuquerque. Paul loaded the BASIC in, and amazingly it worked. I mean, the MITS people were amazed, and Paul was amazed, because there were so many things that could have gone wrong.
I'm just going, oh my gosh, I can't believe all this code, because I'm imagining in my head all the code that Bill and I had written over the previous 2.5 months. It was all working.
So that they became our first customer, and that's when Microsoft really got started, was there in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
This one morning, in comes this kid, hair's all messed up, he has jeans and sneakers, and he's walking by my desk and says, hi. Then he goes to the computers and he's typing and looks like he owns the place. He says, well, he does, he's your boss. I said, that's the president? How old is he? And I thought, oh my God, I'm working for a bunch of kids here.
Ohio Scientific Billings, Krememco, IMSI. People don't remember these names, but like the start of any industry, there was just a flourishing of lots and lots of companies, 90% of which went out of business. But we got to do the BASIC for all those machines. And so it was a very exciting time period where I was kind of traveling and doing the business stuff as well as writing a lot of code. And the code had to be very small and precise in those days. It wasn't like you could waste any memory at all. So it had a certain beauty that we were doing the best small software.
Bill loved to challenge people about, I could do that in 2 days. I could write that in, over the weekend. It kept everybody on their toes. We accomplished things that we probably otherwise would never have figured out we could have done.
Kazuhiko Nishi is a lot like Paul and I. That is, he was an independent thinker. He'd seen the microprocessor and what it could do. He and I met, and we found that we had a common view that the computer could do amazing things. And he thought we should start working with these Japanese hardware companies, because there were many of them.
We started without any agreement. Later, we wrote a one-page agreement and sent it over to me and said, I don't even read, and I signed. That was the beginning.
The original vision of the company was a slogan. It was a computer on every desk and in every home. And in the mid-1980s, that was still kind of a crazy thing. And we get a lot of pushback from people who would either say, look, there's no way that they'll be on every desk, because most business people don't need a computer. And especially they don't need it in the home. That's what we took most grief for, was this idea that, what, a computer in every home? What would you do with it? It went in a very short period of time from insane that everyone would have a computer to, my God, of course everyone needs to have a computer.
Number 5, Walt Disney. इसका भी नाम आपने सुना होगा. Today Disney rakes in billions from merchandise, movies and theme parks around the world. But Walt Disney himself had a bit of a rough start. He was fired by a newspaper editor. नौकरी इसको मिली, newspaper editor ने इसको निकाल दिया because he lacked imagination. क्योंकि imagination नहीं थी. And no good ideas. और अच्छे ideas का मालिक नहीं था. फिर क्या हुआ? After that, Disney started a number of businesses that didn't last too long. उसने अपने business शुरू किए लेकिन ज़्यादा देर नहीं चले. And ended with bankruptcy and failure. He kept plugging along, however, and eventually found a recipe for success that worked. Disneyland भी है. देखिए, कामयाब होने के लिए एक क्लिक चाहिए, एक अच्छा आइडिया चाहिए. आपके घरों में चूहे तो लाजमी होंगे. हाँ जी, है. जब चूहा देखते हैं तो क्या करते हैं? उसको पसंद करते हैं, उसको पालते हैं. आप क्या करते हैं? जहां पे नजर आए मार देते हैं उसको. अगर बिल्ली आपके घर में आ जाए तो क्या करते हैं? उसको भी जब तक घर से निकाल ना दें तब तक आप सो नहीं सकते. लेकिन उस बंदे का जहन देखिए जिसने नापसंदीदा चीजों को आपकी पसंदीदा बना दी. वो क्या है? टॉम एंड जेरी. हम उनसे नफरत करते हैं, हमारे बच्चे उनसे मोहब्बत करते हैं. एक नापसंदीदा कैरेक्टर लोगों का पसंदीदा कैरेक्टर बन गया. अंदाजा कीजिए. His idea worked.
By committing to his business and sticking with it, he was now able to build a business that has almost $40 billion in revenue. So today we're going to look at 3 lessons that you can learn for Walt Disney's success and apply it into your company. Lesson number 1 is find something that you love. Walt Disney grew up in the early 1900s on a farm in Missouri and developed a passion for drawing. So much so that one of his neighbors actually paid him to draw some cartoons of his horses. When Walt Disney got to school, he found that he was a good student, but he really enjoyed doodling as opposed to paying attention to his teachers. He connected with one of his high school papers and started drawing patriotic cartoons for the school paper. When he was 16, though, he found that school just wasn't for him. So he dropped out, joined the Red Cross, learned to become an ambulance driver, and actually was shipped to France to become an ambulance driver over there. He couldn't lose that passion for drawing and cartooning, and he ended up plastering his ambulance full of different cartoon creations that he had made. Lesson number 2 is push the boundaries. Walt Disney first made his mark in 1934 when he proposed making a feature-length animation, which had never been done before. It was called Snow White. It took him 3 years to make. He went 100% over budget. People thought he was crazy for doing it. He ran out of money at the end and had to actually act out the last scenes of the movie for his bankers to get the money he needed to close and finish the movie. It ended up being a huge success. It was the biggest hit of the year. He won an Academy Award for it, and it was a financial gain for him. Walt Disney's next big project was Disneyland, a 330-acre project out in California, a theme park which had nothing to do with his movies. People thought he was crazy again. Why would you do this? What tie does it have to your movie business? But he had a vision. He was determined to make it happen, and again, it was a big success for him. Then he went on to open up the Walt Disney World in Florida, and the company was able to open up different theme parks around the world. So the message for entrepreneurs here is push the boundaries. You need to do something different to get your company noticed. As a small entrepreneur, there's so much competition. It's so difficult to get on people's radar screens and make them pay attention to you. So you have to do something that's going to get you noticed, something that will help you stand out from the crowd. So what is it that will be your equivalent of a Snow White? Something that's never been done before, that's really going to get you noticed and get the attention paid to your business. Lesson number 3 is stay top of mind. Walt Disney did everything he could to make sure people kept remembering the Walt Disney name. He did a lot of advertising, as an example. So he did TV campaigns, direct mail campaigns, print ads. He even did grocery store coupon cutouts. So when you're at the grocery store, you're thinking about Walt Disney. He was also a pioneer in merchandising. So whenever a new feature film came out that was a Walt Disney production, you would also be able to buy all the merchandise that went along with it. Today, Walt Disney is known not only for its movies, but its TV stations, theme parks, dolls, toys, games, and a whole host of other merchandise. So the lesson for entrepreneurs is stay top of mind. You need to do whatever you can to make sure your customers are always thinking about you. The easiest way to grow a business is to sell more to your existing customers. The hardest way to grow a business is to go out and try to find new customers. So do whatever you can to make sure your customers are always thinking about you. You're the first person that comes to mind when they're thinking about your product or service, and it's the best way to be able to grow your business. Walt Disney is an entrepreneurial legend who's built up one of the most recognized companies in the world. But remember, when he first got started, he had no money. Nobody believed in him. He had to live out of his office because he couldn't afford an apartment. And he survived on a diet of cold beans because he couldn't afford other food. By following his lessons though, you too can achieve entrepreneurial success. So remember, find something you love, push the boundaries, and stay top of mind.
Moreover, we have Albert Einstein. ये भी मशहूर आदमी है. इसके बारे में देखिए. Most of us take Einstein's name is synonymous with genius, but he didn't always show such promise. हम इसको genius समझते हैं, लेकिन वो इस तरह का genius शुरू में नहीं था. According to his teacher, Einstein did not speak until he was 4. गौर कीजिए, आइंस्टाइन बोल नहीं सकता था. जब 4 साल का भी हो गया था तो बोल नहीं सकता था. And did not read until he was 7. 7 साल का हो गया था और उसे पढ़ना नहीं आता था. Einstein, causing his teachers and parents to think he was mentally handicapped. ये चीज उसके पेरेंट्स और टीचर्स को तंग करती थी कि वो जहनी मफलूज है. Einstein, slow and antisocial. Eventually, आखिरकार क्या हुआ? He was expelled from school. स्कूल से उसको निकाल दिया गया. काकार. Was refused admittance to Zurich Polytechnical School. इस स्कूल में भी उसको दाखिला नहीं मिला. It might have taken him a bit longer, but most people would agree that he caught up pretty well in the end, winning the Nobel Prize and changing the face of the modern physics. फिजिक्स में इसके कमालात देखने लायक. लेकिन अगर उसकी प्राइमरी बचपन की जिंदगी देखी जाए तो उसमें वो फेलियर है. स्कूल से निकाल दिया गया, वालिदैन नाखुश हैं, लिखना पढ़ना नहीं आता है. अगर इस तरह का बच्चा आपको मिले तो आप भी इस तरह करें. लेकिन उस बच्चे ने रिकवर कैसे किया कि आज फिजिक्स में उसको ना पढ़ें तो आपकी फिजिक्स कंप्लीट नहीं होती.
Have you ever wondered how Einstein, the founder of relativity, spent his life leading up to and following his world-changing discoveries? In the early years of his life and even into his teenage years, young Albert Einstein was often considered a slow learner and was even told that he would never succeed, a comment that would later undoubtedly add to his decision to drop out of school. How can such a brilliant man fail repeatedly and still become one of the most famous scientists in history? Take a look at Einstein's entire inspiring time.
Isaac Newton, another scientist. इसकी history पढ़िए. He was undoubtedly a genius. When it came to math, he had some failings early on. जब maths की बात आती है तो निकम्मा था शुरू में. He never did particularly well in school, and when put in charge of running the family farm, he failed miserably. So poorly, in fact, that an uncle took charge and sent him off to Cambridge, where he finally blossomed into the scholar we know today. अंकल ने उसकी सरपरस्ती की, किसी यूनिवर्सिटी में भेजा और आज आप न्यूटन साइंसदान को देख रहे हैं. उनकी सक्सेस का राज आपसे जानेंगे.
Revolutionary English physicist, mathematician, and philosopher Sir Isaac Newton is perhaps the most famous scientist in history. Born to a farmer in 1642, Newton worked his way through school waiting tables and cleaning wealthier students' rooms. He went to university at Cambridge, where he would eventually earn a professorship. During the Great Plague in 1665, Cambridge shut down and Newton returned home. It was during this hiatus that he first conceived the method of infinitesimal calculus, began to theorize the laws of planetary motion, and started his work with light and color. Though his discoveries would change the world of science, he didn't care about the glory and fame that came with them. In 1671, Newton demonstrated his revolutionary reflecting telescope for the Royal Society, and soon after published his notes on color, describing his research on optics. After a visit from Royal Society member Edmund Halley, encouraging Newton to prove Robert Hooke's hypothesis on planetary motion, Newton wrote his Principia, which introduced his 3 laws of motion and first described the idea of gravity. His work made him very popular and led Newton to being elected to Parliament. After several years in London, Newton suffered a nervous breakdown. Though he came out of it, his interest in physical science was replaced with philosophy and alchemy, particularly how they both related to a higher power. Newton's later years were spent less in science and more as a public figure. Upon Robert Hooke's death in 1703, Newton became president of the Royal Society, though he didn't get along with many of its members, and made many enemies. Newton spent his final years a wealthy and famous man, whose discoveries made enormous impact on society.
In the century that came after Newton, the 1800s, we find that the fascination with science, with order, and with reasoned knowledge really set the whole tone of that culture. The one single figure from whom they drew most deeply was, in fact, Isaac Newton.
Thomas Addison, another beautiful figure. इसकी जिंदगी के बारे में देखिए. In his early years, teachers told Addison he was too stupid to learn anything. पागल बेवकूफ कहते थे उसको, तू नहीं पढ़ लिख सकता पुत्र. ओ एडिसन गोलगप्पे ला ला पुत्र, तू नहीं पढ़ सकता. जैसे हम कहते हैं ना, तनु मैं कैंचियां दे काम ते पा देना है, तू नहीं पढ़ सकता. हम डिस्करेज करते हैं हर बंदे को. उसके टीचर्स ने भी किया. Work was no better, as he was fired from his first 2 jobs for not being productive enough. 2 नौकरियां पहले उसको मिली, प्रोडक्टिव नहीं था, निकाल दिया गया. Even as an inventor, Addison made 1,000 unsuccessful attempts at inventing the light bulb. आपको पता है एडिसन कौन था? लाटू जनाब इसने बनाया था. 1,000 attempts उसने की थी. उसने ठान ली कि मैंने बल्ब बनाना है. और कितनी दफा नाकाम हुआ? तकरीबन 1000 मरतबा. उससे पूछा गया, थॉमस, बड़े भाई थॉमस, कि आपने 1000 अटेम्प्ट्स किए हैं, तो आप तो नाकाम हुए. तो उसका जवाब था, मैं नाकाम नहीं हुआ, मैं कामयाब हूं इसलिए कि मुझे ये पता है कि 999 तरीके ऐसे हैं जिसकी मदद से बल्ब नहीं बन सकता. कैसी बड़ी बात की है उसने. हमें तो एक तरीका भी नहीं पता कि जिससे बल्ब नहीं बन सकता है. उसने कहा मैं नाकाम नहीं हूं. I know 999 methods by using which we cannot make a bulb. 1000वीं उसने कोशिश की जिसकी वजह से आप रोशनी में बैठे हो. वरना लाल टैन या हरी टैन या बलोरी टैन लेके आपने बैठा होना था यहाँ. उसके कारण आपको ये रोशनी मिल रही. Of course, all those unsuccessful attempts finally resulted in the design that worked. अब ये देखिए कि आपकी पार्टिसिपेशन क्या है, आपका रैंक कौन से वाला है.
Right, innovator. One gloomy night in Menlo Park, Tom Addison said, "Gee, it's dark." But then he had a brilliant thought. Electric lights would help a lot. Now others too had tried their best to build a bulb that passed the test, and yet their light would never last. The glowing part burned out too fast.
I see,
said Tom.
I must invent a better, stronger filament.
At first he tried some metal wire, which melted, broke, or caught on fire. So next he tested strips of wood and every single plant he could. He had to char them first, he learned, to make them glow but not get burned. Grasses, reeds, and weeds galore. He tried 6,000 kinds and more. He had some luck with cotton thread, but then he tried bamboo instead. It filled the room with dazzling rays. What's more, it lasted 50 days. And now the light bulb's golden glare is seen in houses everywhere. New York and London, France, Brazil. The bulbs keep getting better still. They light the night when day is done, all thanks to Thomas Addison.
Winston Churchill, this Nobel Prize winning twice elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, UK का 2 दफा ये Prime Minister बना, wasn't always as well regarded as today. Churchill struggled in school and failed the 6th grade. छठी में fail हो गया. After school, he faced many years of political failures as he was defeated in every election of public office until he finally became the Prime Minister at the ripe old age of 62. 62 की एज में जाके Prime Minister बना, लेकिन उसने अपनी struggle नहीं छोड़ी.
Sir Winston Churchill led Britain through the darkest hours of World War II, and this made him one of the modern world's most famous leaders. Does history repeat itself? In the case of the Churchill family, it very well may. About 300 years ago, a fierce battle became a turning point in European history. The Battle of Blenheim was won by an Allied army led by the Duke of Marlborough, who defeated the previously unbeaten French forces in southern Germany. Outnumbered, but led by the tactically astute Marlborough and the Austrian Prince Eugene, the Allies broke through the heart of the French defence, and the rest is history. In this battle, the French army lost nearly 2/3 of its soldiers and never recovered to dominate again, as once they had. It's arguable that this great battle was one of the first steps in establishing the British Empire. A grateful Queen Anne gave a magnificent reward to the victor. He was made the first Duke of Marlborough, given a large sum of money and the luxurious estate of Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. Like the Duke of Marlborough, John Churchill, a descendant was born who would again lead England's military to victory in the world's bloodiest battle, World War II, and his name was Winston Churchill. Within the palace are superb staterooms filled with gold and silver, paintings and tapestries and furniture. But there is one very simple room. It's the room where Winston Churchill was born. The room is kept very much as it was when Winston Churchill was born there in 1874. On May the 10th, 1940, Winston Churchill was made Prime Minister of a nation in extreme jeopardy. Every news bulletin confirmed worsening news of Britain's imminent defeat by the Nazi regime. Churchill's biggest problem was the efficiency of the German U-boat or submarine fleets. The Germans nearly closed the sea lanes and crippled Britain. The threat to the sea lanes was a cause of anxiety, and Churchill once said, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." Then came the dark days when London was blitzed by the Luftwaffe and under continued bombing. But even in those horrific times, the steadfast Churchill was able to make remarkable speeches that inspired his countrymen. It was the fighting in the air that gave England its first break. The aerial Battle of Britain marked a turning point in the Second World War. During the late summer of 1940, Britain's Air Force repelled German attacks that were to have paved the way for invasion after the fall of France. It was the first battle of the Second World War that Hitler didn't win. Like his ancestor John Churchill, Winston Churchill sought assistance from Allied countries to help battle the Nazis' domination of Europe, and it was this combined effort that crippled the Nazi threat. This is the Levadia Palace in Yalta. The palace served as a summer residence of Russian Tsar Nicholas II. In February 1945, Churchill met his wartime allies, Roosevelt and Stalin. It was one of a series of conferences that contributed to the final defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. This is the room where the historic conference of the Big Three took place. In the closing stages of the war, Churchill, Joseph Stalin and the US President Franklin D. Roosevelt redrew the map of Europe in this very room and led to the post-war shape of Europe. Once again, the Churchill family had reshaped Europe.
Number 10, Michael Jordan. ये कौन? Basketball player. उसकी history देखिए. Most people wouldn't believe that a man often lauded as the best basketball player of all time was actually cut from high school basketball team. High school की basketball team से उसको निकाल दिया गया. बाकी पीछे रह के जाता कॉलेज. गौर से देखिए. Luckily Jordan didn't let this setback stop him from playing the game. इस झटके ने उसे खेलने से मना नहीं किया. As he has stated, उसने कहा, I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. 9,000 shots उसने मिस किए गोल करने के. Oops, I have lost almost 300 games. 300 games उसने लूज की. On 26 occasions I have been entrusted to take the game winning shot. कितनी दफा? 26 मरतबा उसको विनिंग शॉट लगाने का मौका मिला, लेकिन फेल हुआ. And I missed. I have failed over and over again and over again in my life. जिंदगी में फेल होता गया, फेल होता गया, फेल होता गया. And this is why I succeed. Goodness gracious. कहता है ये वजह है जिसकी वजह से मैं कामयाब हुआ हूं. इसके अंदर भी कुछ चीज छुपी हुई है, वो आप लिख लीजिए, बाद में पूछूंगा.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice.
North Carolina has won the 1982.
We are all telling ourselves a story. And that day mine changed.
Who was once cut from his high school team.
I need $5,000 to get this thing off the. Who gave me $5 grand when I was at Michigan State doing my program? I didn't have no budget, but I didn't need a budget. I had a dream. I didn't need no help. The president never came and said to me, E.T., we're going to help your program for this institution blow up. The president never came, and I never quit. I never gave up. Why? Because it wasn't her dream in the first place to take care of group of kids from the deep. It was my dream. 16-3 I don't expect you to do, I don't expect you to believe in my dream like I believe in my dream. And the problem with some of y'all is you want somebody else to support your dream. It's yours.
Michael Jordan dominated his sport like few athletes ever have.
I don't know you would die. It's your dream. If you wanted to have it, get your butt up and make it happen. If you wanted to have it, rise and grind. If you wanted to have it, you're going to have to do what I do, and that's get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. If you wanted to have it, that means you're going to have to get harder at 2:15 and get your butt up at 5 so you can get to Detroit by 6.
Not real.
That means you're going to have to speak to the chief, and you're going to have to act like you got all the energy in the world. Why? Because this is my time. This is my moment. Tomorrow. Ain't no such thing as tomorrow. We only got today.
The most successful of all, सबसे ज़्यादा कामयाब, guess. The most successful personality in the world, इनमें से कोई भी नहीं. आपकी नज़र में कोई? नबी पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, जज़ाकल्लाह खैर, प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम.
सबसे औला हमारा नबी, सबसे औला सबसे बाला वाला हमारा नबी, सबसे बाला वाला हमारा नबी, अपने मौला का प्यारा
बिल गेट्स तो इस दुनिया में कामयाब है ना, ठीक है, और 20 साल जिंदा रहेगा, वीजा लग जाना उसका. नबी पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, he kept on सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम struggling and struggling. मक्का की जिंदगी मुश्किलात से भरी, 13 साल जिंदगी शायद. मक्का में असल कामयाबी नहीं मिली, कामयाबी मिली हिजरत के बाद. Did he sallallahu alaihi wasallam ever surrender? Was he sallallahu alaihi wasallam ungrateful? No. उनके पास क्या था? Faith in Almighty Allah. और क्या चीज थी? हर अच्छी चीज कूट कूट के भरी हुई थी. तो फिर हम उनको मिसाल क्यों नहीं बनाते? मैंने जो पर्सनैलिटी सामने आपको 10 दिखाई हैं वो दुनिया में कामयाब हैं. आइजैक न्यूटन जो अपना काम करके चला गया, ठीक है, बिल गेट्स भी चला जाएगा, माइकल जॉर्डन भी चला जाएगा, विंस्टन चर्चिल भी चला जाएगा, बाकी रह क्या जाएगा? नबी पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम कुछ छोड़ के गए, मीरास छोड़ के गए, जिसको अपनाने से हम दुनिया में भी सफलता पाएंगे और आखिरत में। ही मॉडल, उनके अहकामात, उनकी तालीमात की पैरवी करना हम पर फ़र्ज़ है। तो आइए आज हम ये सोचते हैं कि हमने जो पहले अपने टारगेट्स बनाए हुए थे उसको रब करेंगे। हमने कोई फेवरेट पर्सनालिटी अपनी ज़िंदगी में बनाई हुई थी, उसको रब करके ये वाली फेवरेट पर्सनालिटी को वहाँ पे चिस्पा करेंगे। फिर मैं आपसे कहता हूँ, बिल गेट्स बनने में कोई मुज़ायका, कोई बुरी बात नहीं है, लेकिन बिल गेट्स इसलिए बने कि आप चाहते हैं कि मेरा मुसलमान भाई कंप्यूटर इस्तेमाल करे ताकि वो दीन की तबलीग कर सके, ताकि घर बैठे हमारी माएँ बहनें तालीम हासिल कर सकें। इसलिए नहीं कि केबल गई दिए थे VCR ला ली, ये मकसद नहीं। उसका मकसद एक फेम था, पब्लिसिटी थी। लेकिन मुसलमान का मकसद पब्लिसिटी नहीं है, उसका मकसद अपने दीनी भाई और